proceedings, the identification of citizens desiring to comment on the agenda item. There's really only one agenda item. There's an action item that the council has to take care of. So let's move to item number 1 first. And Amanda, if you would take care of that, please.
Beer and/or liquor application for Bridgeview Center, 102 Church Street, temporary outdoor service area on October 14th, 2016. Recommendation, approve the application.
Move the recommendation as presented. Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, take the roll.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Strebe?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes. Thank you. Item number 2 is the presentation discussion of the recently adopted Wapello County minimum wage. And our outline for tonight's meeting is to really hear from anybody in the audience who wants to address this item. We do ask that you give your name and location address. This is the only item we're talking about tonight. We are not planning to take any vote or any action. The council has agreed we will hear from everybody in the audience that wants to speak. There will be a time limit, though, so that we don't get into the wee hours of the morning. And once we've had a chance to hear from those present in the audience, then we'll turn it back to the council and let them ask you any questions, make any comments, and share any thoughts they have. So at this point, if you haven't filled out one, please go ahead and do that. The first one I picked up on the basket was Keith Cavanis. Keith, would you come up, please?
Thank you. Keith Cavanis, 2851 Oak Meadow Drive here in Ottumwa. Council, Mayor, Administrator, appreciate the opportunity this evening to address you and provide some information that may be helpful in our community regarding this issue. I would first like to mention, and this information may be redundant, please forgive me if I'm telling you something you already know. But when the chamber polled the members of the chamber, they came back with a 85+% in opposition to this issue. Secondarily, anyone who does not have revenue generating $300,000 in a year's time in their business is not even applicable to any minimum wage, and that won't change with this. $300,000, under $300,000 exempts them from having to pay minimum wage. Next, I just want you to keep in mind, if in fact you choose to pass this legislation or not turn it down, it will be important to know how you would intend to enforce it. I'm not sure that you have the right to go into someone's business and ask to see their books. So whether they are doing $300,000 in revenue may be a question they may have to address through an attorney or some other form of information. Supply and demand should drive the market for employment. Few, if any, businesses can hire good help for $2.25 an hour. Business must maintain a margin of profit. They have two choices to do this. They must either charge more for their products or use fewer people and less hours to maintain their cost. We want our city and county to be a business-friendly and current to both current and new businesses coming into our community. Merchants raising these prices may cause people to buy their products outside of Ottumwa. The city of Ottumwa gets its money from property taxes, sales taxes such as hotel motel tax, grocery stores, restaurants, retail stores, some of which, reluctant, we've already lost. Ottumwa has about 35% retirees in this community who are on a fixed income, who have to work sometimes at part-time jobs just to exist. Young people coming into the workforce need to be trained. Employers can't afford to pay top wages to train new people. You cannot put the undue burden on the backs of our local merchants. If a local merchant had to pay $2 per hour more for 10 employees, they would have to pay at least $2.35 per hour more to cover matching Social Security, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, and even more. Just the additional cost of 10 employees increase $2 per hour would mean the additional cost would be at least $4,325 per month that they have to add to their cost line, with little or no way of recouping that cost. If the employment number was increased to 100 employees, the increased cost would be $43,250 per month to recover that unrecoverable cost. Please help Ottumwa to prosper and grow and not shrink and get smaller. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Keith. Next person is Michael Inman.
Good evening. I just want to reflect a little bit about the Board of Supervisors meetings that we were attended. And one of the questions that was brought up by many business owners was how are they going to incur the cost that this is going to affect them. And I recall one gentleman was talking about it was going to cost him $15,000 in 2.5 years when this takes full effect. So he posed the question to the board of where is that money going to come from? Well, they talked about, well, there is a 90-day training wage, which basically doesn't mean anything. But bottom line is they said, we don't know. One of the quotes from that meeting addressing this was, you'll get a better class of employee because people from neighboring counties will come here because they can make more money doing the same job or similar. So we have more employees to choose from. So how is that good for Ottumwa if all these other people from other counties are going to migrate here to take the jobs of local Ottumwans? Then the Board of Supervisors member went on to say, but in the end, you asked me if it was going to come out of prices or out of your pocket. That's true. So they know that this is going to have a direct effect on businesses. The other thing that I recall from the meeting was another gentleman who spoke about the Seattle project. And he talked about one study that he had read about a restaurant chain that had 3 dishwashers. Well, because of the minimum wage increase, they're going to $15. They chose to buy better equipment and go down to 1 dishwasher. So therefore, 2 dishwashers, they're unemployed. But in his analogy, that was okay because I believe he said in Minnesota and Wisconsin, they produce dishwashing machines. So they were going to hire more people to produce equipment. Well, how many people washing dishes have to lose their jobs so we can hire a few more in the dishwashing or in the machine industry? So this hurts the very people it's designed to help, the unskilled entry-level workers. Raising the minimum wage to $10, $10 or $15 doesn't gain us anything. It's providing them some education and discipline, and that's how they're going to achieve success. It's not just subjectively raising an entry-level wage. Thank you.
Thank you. Trudy Cavanis.
Thank you for letting me address the council. The minimum wage is, you can say no one can live on a minimum wage. Minimum wage, that is not what it was designed for. Minimum wage is for a starting wage, an unskilled wage, and so on and so forth. And many people have talked about how once people have gained the skills after a certain time, they will get a increase in wage. Thing I would like to discuss though with the council, Wapello County and Ottumwa is struggling economically. I don't think that's anything new to any of you here. And a lot of why people come to Ottumwa or start a business in Ottumwa is the perception of what is Ottumwa. And by raising the minimum wage in this manner, not doing it as a state, but doing it as in small little islands, you are saying Ottumwa doesn't want to grow. And I don't think that is what the council feels. I hope that's not what the council feels. Keith and I have had a business for here for many years and closed it a couple years ago, but wages were one of our largest expenses For a small business, that's the way it is. For John Deere, that's probably not what their highest expenses are. But I guess I would just like to have the council look at this. My understanding is from what they said at the supervisors meeting that they just basically took Johnson County's information and put Wapello in place of Johnson and said, let's do this. The difference between Wapello County and Johnson County is night and day. They are a thriving area. They are not struggling economically like Wapello and Ottumwa is. And I guess that's what I would like to have you look at, is how will this perception cost Wapello County and Ottumwa jobs? It is, and I think especially with our smaller, we're revitalizing downtown, we're trying to bring in new businesses, we have Market on Main, and whether they have to raise that minimum wage, people will consider not coming to Ottumwa. Polk County took about 6 months to consider this. Wapello County chose to rush it through. I would like to have the council look at this. Obviously, you could always vote to go back and say let's raise everybody's wages. But I would like to have you consider how it's going to affect our economic development in perception. All the studies in the world can't take care of the perception. So that is the one thing I would like to have the city of Ottumwa look at and decide how you would hurt the economic development. And I know there's several things going on, but it may slow it down or may even stop it. And I don't think Ottumwa can afford to lose more businesses and jobs. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trudy. I saw a couple more people grabbing forms. Are they? Bring them up, please, and we'll take them in. Thanks, Steve. Steve Siegel.
Yeah, it's one of them. Well, if we listen to the prior speakers, and I certainly respect their opinions, but all the states around us have raised the minimum wage. Maybe I missed it. All the jobs pouring into Iowa away from these states with a higher minimum wage, not seeing it. I think that's overstated. We've raised the minimum wage 28 times since it started. We haven't had this disastrous impact that everybody's afraid of. But we do have a major problem in this country of wage inequality. And I think that's emerging in the presidential election and others around us. And what are we going to do about it? The lower income people, the minimum wage hasn't gone up for 6, 7, 8 years. So they're not making any more money. But the upper 1%'s really making a lot of money. In Wapello County alone, we have about 3,000 or 4,000 citizens who would be impacted by the ordinance that the county passed, impacted favorably. And I think it would also, as a sidelight, reduce cost of government aid or assistance, welfare, food stamps, et cetera, because people would be able to pay for things themselves and would feel better about it, doing it themselves rather than collecting government assistance. Several weeks ago, when the chamber had their roundtable out at Indian Hills, we had some economists here from the Iowa Policy Project. And they assured us that numerous studies showed there was no long-term negative impact on business in communities which raised their minimum wage, even if the neighboring community did not. To the contrary, actually it put more money in people's pockets, which since most of them were low-income people, they spent locally, and it actually created a little economic boomlet. So I don't think this is going to be the disaster that some people are afraid of. Enforcement, if you leave this alone, the county would be the just accept our ordinance, the county would be the enforcement agency, so that wouldn't be a city issue. So don't want to go on and on because we've heard all this before. And Polk County, as Trudy pointed out, took 6 months, but they actually came up with higher numbers than we did. They're going to 1075. So I think this is happening. Roughly 25% of Iowans will be covered by higher minimum wages with the 4 counties that have done it. Yes, we'd like the state to do it. I don't see that happening anytime soon, even though every state around us but one has raised their minimum wage. I haven't heard a negative word about that in any of those states. So thank you for your time. We encourage you to take the Wapello ordinance.
Thank you, Steve. John Tauschen?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I'm going to speak in opposition to the minimum wage increase. I swear I did not talk to Keith or Trudy before I came here tonight, but the first thing I wanted to talk about was Johnson County versus Wapello County versus Polk County, as the gentleman that preceded me said. You can't even compare those counties. You can't compare them demographically, education-wise, job opportunity-wise. Their incomes are much, much larger. For instance, Johnson County has the University of Iowa hospital system, and the university itself has 34,500 employees. We have 35,000 people in this town. It's a booming community financially compared to us. I have a business here in town. We started 2.5 years ago, but I've been in business 30 years. Before this business started, I had another one for 5 years since I moved here in 2008. Clearly, our highest thing that we pay is labor. We've never paid the minimum wage. We've always started at least $1, $1.50 over. If you leave it to business owners, we know what to pay people. We don't need to have legislation by proxy or in absentia. That's what I call it, is collective bargaining by proxy. And if we have people that start where we start them, and we've never used the minimum wage as a baseline, we don't expect them to stay there long. We're going to get rid of them. If they don't get a raise, we want them to have a raise, a nice raise. If they don't get that raise, they're gone. So we have right now 18 employees. We have all of them starting higher, quite a bit higher than the first year's increase, which would go to, I think, $810. They all start there. We've got 50% of our crew over $10 an hour, and 20 to 22% of them at $12 an hour. And we're the definition of a small business. So if you leave it in the hands of us, we know what to pay people. We want them to make money. This living wage thing is, Trudy said, it's not meant to be a living wage. These are start-in positions for kids, people starting out for whatever the reasons are at that point in their lives. It's a start-out place. And as far as, you can't raise a family on $7.25 an hour. We all know that. It's impossible. But they seek to rise up the ladder. We want to help them rise up the ladder, whether they stay with us or not. So also, the minimum wage just is absolutely punitive to the small employer. Yes, it puts some money in some people's pockets, but it damages our 941 payroll taxes, our Social Security, our FICA, our Iowa State Workforce Development taxes, and other taxes. And I just want to tell you that we've had several businesses close just this calendar year. I ask you, before you vote on this, query those owners. Ask them why they closed. Ask them what their biggest expense was, because I already know, labor. And so we've been fortunate. One of them's reopened downtown, but we've lost some businesses here. And we definitely need business to come to Ottumwa and Wapello County. I've always thought that market interference does not work. And I've always sought my raises by merit. I think most other workers do too. Thank you.
Is there one more out in the audience in the basket? Thanks, Tony. Jack Blackwell?
Thank you. My name is Jack Blackwell, 2645 Benedale in Ottumwa. And I didn't plan to speak tonight because I have a few problems with my voice. It's not something serious. But when I see decisions, I ran a business for 40 years. My son now operates the business. And as the preceding gentleman mentioned, I know what it takes to live for a family. So my employees always made higher than minimum wage and the most that I could pay them to live in a nice home, to drive a nice car, and to raise their families. We're seeing today decisions made on things that affect business by people that have never owned a business, that have never met a payroll. If you're going to make a decision, it would be good to talk to people that make payrolls. These are the people that are on the front lines. And again, I apologize for my voice, but I thought it was very important for me to speak because we have to take government out of business to a certain degree. There's a place for government that has to be to protect businesses, to protect employees, because sadly, there are a few places in our country that will hire people for starvation wages. But most of the businesses I know in Ottumwa, and over the years being president of the Chamber of Commerce, being very involved in our community, I think we need to step back and say, what is best for everyone? There was a fellow years ago who was smarter than any of us. And he said, if you give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. And then they will be back, I'm paraphrasing, be back tomorrow for another fish. If you teach the person to fish, it will last him a lifetime. So let's, instead of having lawyers and people, not that I don't have respect for professional people, but people that have been on the firing line, let's get their opinions before we make a hasty decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to address the council or make comments about the minimum wage? Seeing none, then I would open it up to council discussion and comments, and we have no order, so whoever raises their hand first will be addressed. You must speak directly into the microphone tonight.
I suppose I'll go first. I always go first. Well, I'll just start out with when I ran for council, up until the point, I have always been in support of and championed a living wage over a minimum wage. And in my opinion, the two are very different. A minimum wage, I believe, can arbitrarily be picked out of thin air and established. I think minimum wages have a tendency to be harmful in some ways on a local level to small business, much of what we've heard here tonight. However, I do support a living wage, and for the very reason of that, and I'll read exactly what a living wage is. And I'm referencing from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a living wage, and what it is meant to be. So the living wage model is an alternative measure of basic needs. It is a market-based approach that draws upon geographically specific expenditure data related to families' likely minimum food, childcare, health insurance, housing, transportation, and other basic necessities. The living wage model does not allow for what many consider the basic necessities enjoyed by many Americans. It does not budget funds for pre-prepared meals, nor those eaten in restaurants. It does not include money for entertainment, nor does it allocate leisure time for unpaid vacations or holidays. Lastly, it does not provide a financial means for planning for future through savings and investment, or for the purchase of capital assets, or retirement, or home purchases. The living wage is a minimum income standard that, if met, draws a very fine line between the financial independence of working poor and the need to seek out public assistance or suffer consistent and severe housing and food insecurity. So while I don't support a minimum wage, which can be any number of numbers picked out of the sky, I do support a living wage model because it can be specific to an area, and it is very basically a model that it will sustain just what it is, basic needs of a person. And so, like I said, I've supported that from the beginning when I ran for this, and I do support it now. And a living wage for Wapello County is set at $9.59 for one working individual. And this is a very touchy issue. It's a very, it's not an easy one. It's very sensitive. We got a lot of local businesses, small business, and I'm not talking about Walmart and those types of businesses. I'm talking about a lot of good hometown businesses here in Wapello County and in Ottumwa, the majority of them being in Ottumwa. But for the life of me, I can't get my head wrapped around the fact that if we are to employ folks in this town, that we would not want to at least employ them at a livable wage, one that means that they are to survive and work. I know it's not government's role to interfere in that. I truly believe it's not government's role at a local, state, or federal level to determine what wages are or to bring people out of poverty. But to deny them the opportunity to survive, I think would be a travesty on our part. Now, we give opportunity to business, and we give opportunity to large and small, one of which we just did here not too long ago to improve a building and a parking lot. And I think giving opportunity is much different than giving out a handout. I think a minimum wage set arbitrarily would be giving a handout, would be setting an arbitrarily a wage based on no data and evidence would be giving a handout. But giving an opportunity is what we do. Giving an opportunity gives people the freedom to choose whether they want to succeed or fail. And with a livable wage, that opportunity is to survive. They still have an opportunity to better themselves, to work themselves into a better job, or they still have the opportunity not to do that or to fail. But to simply deny them the opportunity to survive is something I can't consciously be for. And that is why I do support a living wage. And for Wapello County, like I said, that is $9.59. Anything short of that, I think, is something that we would be wrong in supporting. Now, the ordinance that the Wapello County supervisors have proposed over 3 years tops out at $10.10. I would be willing to support that. I notice that the enforcement, if we do decide to opt out and come up with a living wage or at something less than that, there would be some enforcement issues. I know that's a problem, that hang up with me right now. But anything short of a living wage, I would be hard to support. Now, I'm still open to opinions and suggestions at this point. That's what we do. We listen and take that into account. And we're far away from having a decision made. But at this point in time, that's where I stand as one person. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilman.
Matt, I have a quick question for you regarding that, and I'm not ready to speak yet, but are you talking about a living wage over the same proposed period of time, incrementally over 3 years to arrive at that number that you mentioned?
Right, I would support that too. Rather than the 90-some cents over 3 years, that would be, okay. Yeah. That.
So not immediately to the living wage, but over the same period of time.
I could support that, yes.
Could I follow up? Because Victor, that's a good question. But could I follow up, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say 3 years from now, then we came up with that living wage target you were talking about. So in your research there, does it indicate how often that living wage is adjusted?
This living wage, it's a good question. This living wage here is actually based on faulty data, in my opinion. It's actually 2 years old. It's actually not current. And MIT, I don't believe, has the funding to support a year-by-year study. So this actually has 2015 data incorporated into it.
So it would probably be higher.
Yeah, the last time it was, I believe, in the $9.40 range in 2000. That would be 2012. So, a couple cents maybe.
Thank you. Okay.
That's an assumption.
Councilman Strebe, Councilman Rowe, any comments?
Well, I think it's, every person here made the promise when we were elected to office to, protect everyone in the community to the best of our abilities. That's the citizens of the community as well as the businesses. Our charge is to protect the most people and to protect the future of the community. I want to stress to everyone that, we've heard people say that we have the power to do this. And I just want to remind everybody here that we have the privilege, not the power. And I think that that's important because just exactly what everybody that got up and spoke tonight said, government doesn't and shouldn't play a role in this whole thing. So we don't have the power, we have the privilege. The bigger issue is, I agree with Matt, is the difference between a minimum wage and a living wage. One step farther, wage compression. Livable wage, that's a provable wage. It's not something pulled out of the sky. $10.10, it serves the ladder of that. It's pulled out of the sky. There's nothing to prove that 1010. Somebody could argue that Johnson County had it, or we've pushed this out over so many years, whatever. But it still, for the most part, is pulled out of the sky. And we can talk about Johnson, Polk, Lynn counties, whatever. Even Solon agreed that maybe this isn't the best option for our community. As a local government, I don't think we should dictate what companies pay their staffs. At the end of the day, shackling employees and shackling employers to wage, I don't think is the best option. They have a few options at the end of the day after this implementation that they can do. They can raise their prices if their business model allows for them to raise prices. Some businesses don't have that luxury, so they have to absorb that cost. How do they absorb that cost? They can reduce staffing, as one of the gentlemen up here said. They can lay people off. They can move their business to another community. I doubt people will move to another community. That's, statistically, that's just not likely to happen. But you can go to any community that research has been done on where they've raised minimum wages. They have reduced staffing levels. They have reduced benefit structures. They have reduced the number of hours that they pay their employees for. So, these are actual provable facts. We've heard the mention of reducing people's necessity for public assistance while they're on this increased minimum wage. That's awesome that they're going to be reduced public assistance. However, I would still argue the fact that because their public assistance will be reduced by the amount of increased wages that they have, they will not see any wealth appreciation. The county won't see any wealth appreciation, so we're net zero. So I don't see where, ultimately we do want to have people off of public assistance. That's very true, but we still see no wealth appreciation from that. The biggest issue that I see here is the wage compression. And this is as a business person, what bugs me the most. Not too many people have discussed this, and that's the biggest problem. It's going to be an added expense to increase the bottom sector, the employee base. Employees aren't going to be likely to, those people that are right above that threshold, they're not going to be likely to increase those people's wages. So we have a situation where employers that once were proud to say we don't pay minimum wage to our employees, now all of a sudden don't have money to do anything but be a minimum wage employer, which is problematic. It's hard to sell your business to potential employees when all of a sudden you're a minimum wage employer. And then we add on the fact that, there's additional FICA taxes, additional workers' compensation taxes. Who are we as a council, as county supervisors, who are we to tell a small business owner who's just barely getting by that you don't deserve to have food on your table because we want to shift that money over to somebody else? And I still take issue with the fact that this is done on the local level instead of the state or federal level. We've been told that the state of Iowa does intend to take this up at the next legislative session. Now, whether that happens or not, we'll wait and see. But we had a county supervisor who actually said, "Do we really want to be on an island?" I don't want to be on an island. People will come to Wapello County if the minimum wage is increased, but they're still going to take those extra monies that they were given because they're making more in Wapello County than they were in Monroe County. They're going to take those back to Monroe County to live. They're not going to spend all of that here. They're going to spend it in Monroe County. We might see a little bit of a bump with restaurants, whatever, gas stations that they might stop in, but the vast majority of their money is going to be spent in their home county. It's not going to be spent here. Another point that I think is worth mentioning is the increases that are laid out post 3 years. What do we? This is really vague. What do we do if the CPI is negative? In 2009, the CPI was negative. Do we hold flat at zero? Do we take money back? Are we still required to give a 3-4% increase? Those are things that need to be answered, and along with the fact that this is based off of statistics that include places like Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Louis. We're not Minneapolis, Chicago, St. Louis, or Des Moines. Those are skewed statistics. The economic boom that St. Louis is feeling that's impacting that rate might not be touching us at all, but we as a county are going to be making up the difference because of that. I would also add that, at the beginning of this year, we signed a contract, 6 of them, I believe, with union members in the city of Ottumwa. That was a 3-2-2, if memory serves me correctly, over the next 3 years. If we go with the minimum wage increase, that's a 13%, if my math is correct, somewhere in the 13% range to increase the minimum wage. It's kind of a slap in the face of the union members, in my opinion, if we tell them, and city and county employees as far as that goes, if we tell them that they're only worth a 2 or 3% increase, yet we're willing to give a 13% increase to those folks that are making minimum wage. I'm rambling, so I'm just going to kind of cut this a little bit short here. One of the last things that I'd add is we as a city council just spent $50,000 one meeting ago. We spent $50,000 of taxpayer money to bring retail business to Ottumwa. And now we're doing something that would compromise retail business coming to Ottumwa. This is something that has plagued Ottumwa for years, that the citizens of this city have complained, and they've been right, that we as a community, we as a council have made terrible decisions. We shoot ourselves in the foot, and here we are sitting debating on whether we're going to do that again. That doesn't make any sense at all. I'm not interested in extending olive branches just so we can get along. I'm interested in doing what's right for the community, and part of our community is our business community. So for all those reasons, I'm really not willing to support a minimum wage increase of 10.10. There hasn't been enough study done. I think that Iowa has proven with the Iowa Medicaid restructuring that doing things haphazardly is disastrous. We've made decisions, and then almost immediately thereafter, we've had tragic problems with it. So the idea of making yet another decision on the local level when it shouldn't even be a local decision anyway, I don't understand why we're bringing partisan politics down to the local level. I cannot support a minimum wage increase.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Any other council comments? Go ahead. Not ready yet. Well, okay. Speak right in there. Yeah, first of all, I would sure like to thank the employers, the business people that came tonight. And I thought several of you just closer, I could eat it. But thank you so much, because you're the ones that make this city work, in my opinion. You employ people. And I think of a lot of things we do, every month we should make an effort to recognize groups of you and thank you for the people that you employ at the rates that you have the right to establish. I would really encourage my colleagues here to clearly vote to opt out of what the supervisors have done. Several reasons being, I think every single one of us, as I looked, when we ran for election, one of the major things was economic development and being business friendly. And I thought, again, the point brought up by employers here was, have we talked to businesses? I've had a lot of business people talk to me, and I've tried to listen closely. And Supervisor Siegel's comment on the 4,000 people that it would affect in this county, I haven't talked to a business yet that pays as low as minimum wage. So that's another one of those curious figures as to where it came from. Mark, colleague, you did such an outstanding job with your outline and your notes. And of course, I agree with so much of what you said, but mine's a little simpler, but it's the same point. I would vote initially right away to opt out, because to me, this is clearly a legislative decision. And I think I've lived in Iowa for 58 years now. And one of the things about Iowa that I have such pride in is the unity in this state, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, that we do things in a unified way that we're well respected nationally. And I just think this is clearly the wrong way to go on this island, or to become this island. Mrs. Cavanis made a comment that struck me. I think all of us would agree that this town is turning the corner. We're really making some gains, and we've got several things ready to happen at any time. But part of that is based on perception. And so if we do this without listening to our business folks and employers, and just doing it because I'm not sure. I asked the supervisors, and by the way, I went to their first meeting not even knowing that that was also their first vote. So I was disappointed that they didn't, and each body governs the way they think they should, but to not have involved business people and the community first, you just go, yep, here's our first vote, here's our second, here's our third. But the other aspect of that is I did ask all three of the supervisors, because I get this pointed back to me, well, Bob, the legislature won't act. Well, we don't always get things done as quickly as we would like to. But I asked them, because Mary Gaskell at one of the meetings, Representative Gaskell, was, I thought, just a little tentative on, well, is the state discussing it? Did they bring it up? But I asked each of the three supervisors, did any of the three of you directly say, as a supervisor, to Representative Gaskell, I want you to speak to your colleagues up at the state level. I want this progressed. And I did not get an answer from any one of them that they had. So I think part of what you said, Mark, was do your homework. And I
I don't mean to take up a lot more time because clearly to me, it's a legislative issue and they should have a chance to work at it. I guess though, in closing, in listening to a lot of businesses the last few weeks, I've come to kind of a realization, or at least my own opinion, that one reason the federal government hasn't done anything since what it is, 2006 or 7, and the state hasn't either, is because it's a complex issue. You do get into the concepts of compression and other things. So my concern, my thought is to opt out. And by the way, I know the other council people need a chance to talk, but I certainly hope that City Administrator Morris, you and Mayor Lazio will both share with us your feelings on this topic. Thank you.
Councilman Stevens or Councilman Strebe?
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm not going to say anything at this time.
Okay.
Victor?
Thank you for coming tonight. I don't have any extensive notes. I'm going to speak extemporaneously, transparently, honestly, candidly. I've thought about this a lot. Certainly, Councilman Meyer's statement about this being a complex issue couldn't be more true. If you look on both sides of this issue, the factors that you can bring to light are numerous on both sides. I also don't disagree with the fact that maybe we all here tonight shouldn't be in this position making this decision, that it should be made on the legislative level. However, right now, that's not the current landscape. And I have a little bit more to say about that in a minute. But I spoke with county supervisors Parker and Siegel, and we had a healthy discussion about this. I do wish that there would have been more discussions that took place beforehand, and I shared that with them. A couple of things that came out of that. First of all, I'll just say for the record that I do support our local businesses, and when I ran for city council, I said that I would support them. Also, however, I pointed out that I'm not for an increase to 1010. I am not for a 3-year incremental increase, because the point I brought up was, what if after a year, after 95 cents, we find out that this is going to hurt our businesses or our nonprofits? So I guess I sort of have a little bit of a middle ground here, in between doing nothing and moving to 1010. And, you know, I'm from a background of laborers. My dad and grandfather were laborers, and my mom, after raising 5 kids, had her own small business. She had a stained glass shop that probably there's still some pieces in churches and in people's residences around here. But the point is that, you know, I think that we ought to look at accepting a 95-cent increase, which is far from $2 or $3, which I am not for, and measuring the impact of that quarterly. And if it looks like after a year, after it goes up to, you know, 820, that this is headed in a negative direction for businesses and for our community, then at that time we can say we don't support any further increases. That also gives us as a city, when we talk about being prepared for the future, that gives us practical experience as citizens, as business owners, as community members, of actually figuring out, say the legislature does come through in 6 to 9 months and bumps it up $2 or $3, then during that time period, everybody has time to figure out what they need to do to be able to continue to thrive in the community. And if there's measures that need to be taken with a small increase, then certainly that would equip people with some knowledge and experience, given the maybe eventual reality that that would jump up considerably more. So I guess I look at this as being accepting of an increase, but absolutely not a 3-year incremental increase without any measurable results or data, and taking a look at how it impacts the city. It will give those people that haven't had the minimum wage increase for however long it's been, 9 years, you know, it'll give them an increase. I don't think 95 cents is going to be a disastrous impact on our city, but if it looks like it's causing any negative results as per the data that we would amass over that year's time on a quarterly basis, then certainly we would take that into consideration and have discussions about not having it be increased anymore. So I guess I sort of have a skinny middle ground, if you will, about this, but I understand what Councilman Myers and Rowe are saying, and I share a lot of the same ideas, and I also understand what Matt said about a living wage. I think, though, that if we put anything on a 3-year track without taking a look at how it's going to impact our city, then we could be potentially heading for some serious consequences. So my idea would be the first year increase, and then taking a look at the effects of that and putting a stop to it if it looks like it's hurting our businesses and our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Skip, do you want to make any comments?
If I said anything, it would be, I agree with a lot of what Mark Rose said. I agree with Strebe, and I agree with Dalby. There's so many issues here, it's hard to sort them out. I'm like someone else stated, I don't like the way it was presented. Someone else said it should be statewide, and I agree with that if we're going to do something. And enforcement's an issue, all of those things. So I'm just repeating what everyone else said.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to ask City Administrator Morris to make some comments.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. One item to bear in mind, and that's just to be clear on this, it is a legislative decision not only on the state level, as we talked about tonight, but whether council endorses, confirms this ordinance that's before us for consideration of the county is certainly a legislative decision. So my job is to offer advice and consent, and council can confirm that, deny that, or modify that. But I do have an opinion I do wish to express tonight. First of all, when you look back to the year 1965, and you were to look at, if you were to take inflation and index it, the minimum wage was higher in 1965 than it is today. I think Robert Kennedy put it best when he said the concerns of one inevitably become the concerns of us all. I don't believe there's anyone in this room who stands against the idea of reducing poverty, either individually or collectively. However, as the old law of physics tells us, to every action, there is a reaction. And I want to talk about two items, I think, which speak in ringing tones. One of them is the enforcement mechanism, which was talked a little bit about here this evening. I was pleased to see in the paper a few days ago some of the conversations about the enforcement mechanism and how that would be handled. Supervisor Siegel has indicated that would be something that would occur on the county level. I'm glad to hear that that is something that they've certainly taken an interest in. But I do want to talk a little bit about enforcement. We've shared some stories tonight about what other counties have been doing, what their experiences have been. I just want to share with you some items I took from an article. This appeared in the Des Moines Register on August 25th of this year, August 25th, 2016. These are some notes as it relates to what Polk County is struggling with. As it relates to the enforcement of the minimum wage ordinance, the Iowa Labor Commission states, and they're the entity on the state level that would enforce this, and I quote, "What counties do on their own is going to be up to the counties. Polk County does not spot check employers. For an example, compliance and enforcement issues are investigated once a complaint is made. The county attorney stated that their office is on a quote-unquote learning curve as it relates to processing investigations. The assistant county attorney made the comment, and I quote, "We're not going to be out soliciting reports. They'll be complaint driven." If they're complaint driven and there isn't an enforcement mechanism, it just seems to me that you have a toothless tiger. And I don't believe in any of the items I've read, whether they're articles in the newspaper or what you can read on the web, that there is, and in fact, a forthright enforcement mechanism. The other item I want to speak to, I'll say this one item, and I don't have anything else to say on this other than I do want to state my recommendation as your city administrator. And that relates to what cities can do and what cities should do. There's a report from an engineering society that says for every dollar that a city invests in infrastructure, you get a return on your investment somewhere between $2.50 and $3.20. That seems to me where the action is. Cities are in the business of investing in infrastructure, not setting artificial wages. And to that point, I think it's worth noting, when you look back over the last 10 years, what this city has invested in infrastructure. When you combine the work that has been done not only on the sewer construction projects, sewer maintenance capital, and then in addition to that, street construction projects, it's $99 million, nearly $1 billion in investments. That, I would argue, is where the action is for cities. If you really want to move the needle and speak to the topic of economic development, which I think unfortunately gets thrown around a great deal. Everyone's in favor of the concept of economic development. I would argue that I don't think it speaks very well to us. We had a conference call just yesterday with our folks from Buxton about identifying specific retail entities that have, quite frankly, a footprint that would fit here. And we start off with a wage that is, I would argue, inflationary. In addition to that, another item in that ordinance I don't think has received a great deal of discussion, but if you look at the county's ordinance, it's indexed to the consumer price index. And the consumer price index, as you know, can go up and it can go down. This is an item for council certainly to consider, but I would strongly urge the city council to opt out of this ordinance. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. I too would like to just make a couple of comments. I think everybody's had a chance to address the issue from their perspective. I think the goal of the council has been to listen to businesses, to respect an honest discussion. There can be differences between groups and individuals. We've heard tonight this is a very complicated matter, both from a business point of view, a tax implication for small businesses, an issue that has not been, I think, thoroughly looked at and addressed is the impact it would have on young people who are employed by businesses as a first job. The 14 to 17-year-olds certainly has a negative impact and would keep some of them out of the workforce. I too believe it should be a statewide issue legislatively, and we've heard just this last week that the governor plans to bring this up to the Iowa legislature and make this an issue for them, because we just simply cannot have 99 counties making decisions about this type of issue. Attending a recent League of Cities meeting, talking with people from Windsor Heights, their city has 4 counties represented in that city. That's impossible for an administration to deal with. It's just very cumbersome and not good for business. We've got to be business friendly if we're going to continue to grow, and they pay the share of taxes that we depend on. I also don't like being tied to the CIP because, again, I think as you've seen, it doesn't always go up. It does stay flat. Sometimes it goes down. So those are some things. I think it needs a lot more review, and I would hope that the legislature would take some very serious time to study it this year and make a statewide attempt to solve this rather than having each county wrestle with this, because it just becomes divisive for all of us. So with that, I would like to end on a positive note, because sometimes we forget, and I think, again, this is a business that is here in our community, and I have to admit my own ignorance until talking to their CEO this past week. Somebody mentioned this morning at our staff meeting, I think it was Gene, that Community First actually took their day off, which was Columbus Day, and spent half of the day cleaning up our city. They brought 200 and some employees from their organization. They spent time collecting trash all over our city, not just in our parks, not just downtown. They did a wonderful job, and they had a lot of fun doing it, and I got to address them at noontime. And they were just the brightest, most fun group of young people and experienced people who had spent, and it was a nice day. It was a little bit on the cool side, but they were out in our ditches, our parks, downtown, and collected just hundreds of bags of trash. And so again, ownership and pride in our community. And I think that there's just something to be said that I want to publicly thank Community First for that, thinking of us as a city, because they could have done something totally unrelated and did not have to come to Ottumwa to do that. So hats off to all the Community First people who've helped to make Ottumwa shine. Thank you. And lastly, I'd like to invite all of you and those both here tonight and home watching on TV, the Food Truck Frenzy, which is going to be held Saturday on the Market Street Bridge, starts at 4 p.m. There'll be a variety of food and entertainment and fireworks afterwards. So we hope you'll come out and support the efforts downtown. Our next regular scheduled meeting is the 18th, and I think we have a pretty full agenda that night. So we'll be thinking and talking, but we wanted to at least have a chance to give you an idea of what we are hearing from the public and where our council is at as we move forward. So is there any other business for the council? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Rowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Strebe,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby,
Yes.
Councilmember Myers.
Yes.
I have 6:33. Thank you all and good night.